name is Rocco, and this is the Loom. The Loom is a project which is going to go out on podcast in audio format and also in YouTube or Substack in video format. And what we're basically doing is we're looking in an episodic format at a synthesis of the 22 major arcana cards of the tarot, and looking at each of the archetypes and exploring them more deeply, but also looking at combinations and themes throughout those things, and then how to apply these specifically in a form of not quite divination, I would say, but a form of internal inquiry that I call the Loom. And there's two different reading styles, and I might actually tack on a description of those reading styles at the back end of this video. Now, today's topic is discussing the 4 tools of the magician. Now, if you look at the card on the pack of the tarot deck, it will feature this character here, the magician. And you'll see in front of him on the table are 4 implements or tools. They're called the 4 tools of the magician. So closest to him is a sword. Then sort of at the same distance away is a pentacle, a gold coin sort of shape with a 5-pointed star, a golden chalice or cup or a grail, which is the only object standing up, and then a wand or a magician's staff. Now, at some point in time, we will dive more deeply into the magician archetypes himself, and we'll discuss a bit of that today as well. But what we're doing today to set some groundwork is we'll be talking about the 4 tools of the magician. Now, when I do my readings, I have a spot on the reading called the modifier. And the modifier is occupied by one of these 4 cards. So these are the aces in the deck. Oh, come on, camera. So if you flip through your tarot deck, or if you're familiar with tarot at all, you'll realize that there's 2 decks within a pack. There's the major arcana, which are the 22 archetypal cards, and then there's the minor arcana or the minor secret, and it's the deck that looks a lot more like a modern playing card deck. So modern playing cards have got 4 suits as well, which will be explained in depth in the video after this. But they come from an earlier prototype of which this tarot deck that we're working with has an equivalent. And so instead of hearts, diamonds, spades, and clubs, there are cups, swords, pentacles, and wands. Now, each of these things have a certain kind of meaning, and because they're kind of not pivotal, but they add a shape or a context or an accent on top of every reading, it's going to serve our interest to understand what each of those 4 mean and what they mean when they come up in context. And that's pretty much what this video is about. Now, as always, I'm inviting folks to come and do a reading with me. I don't just want to be doing these videos talking into the void. The real cash value of this is either studying these things, these cards with me and the archetypal language, or practicing with me, or coming and doing a reading with me, so that you can either answer these deep, profound questions of your own, or you can actually develop a practice where you work with this as a medium. Now, remember, we're not using this as pure divination or an oracle of fortune telling only. What we're also trying to do is we're trying to use these reading styles to deepen the internal dialogue that we're trying to have anyway. Yeah. And if you book a reading with me, the link will be in the show notes below, and I'll take you through one of the 2 reading styles. Now, at the end of this video, I'll tack something on about the 2 kinds of reading styles that I do, a bit of promotional content. But other than that, let's dive into discussing the 4 tools of the magician. So let's take a look at the magician now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through to the website. And by the website, I mean the Substack webpage. Now, many of you will be receiving this content either as a video or a podcast in your platform of choice, but a lot of the subscribers will be getting them as emails in their inbox, and it's probably the best thing to do if you want to stay close to the content, because not all of the content that's relevant here will be released as audio or video. Sometimes it's just posts on Substack. So if you're a subscriber, you'll get them in your email. But if you want to refer back to these things, rifling through your email becomes a bit of a challenge. So if you go to hermeticareiterated.substack.com, you'll land it here. As the work grows, I've actually organized it. So I teach Hermetics. There's the Loom, all about tarot. And then there's a universal theory of everything. And I'll probably add other sections as well. There's a section about readings, if you're curious about how they work, which I'll get to at the end of this video. But if you want to do work with tarot and you want to get the window onto the knowledge that I have, you go to this section called the Loom. It shows you that it's a podcast and has all the episodes, but there's also posts underneath there that aren't released as episodes. And there's one I want to point your attention to here called Begin Here. And this is how to use that. Now, one of the cool things, you can access this via the Substack app, but you're probably going to need an easy way to reach this. But if you do access it via the web, there's this sexy thing on the left, that little pop-up menu, so that if you want to search for a card, let's say the Magician, there is a little shortcut that takes you just to a summary of the card, right? So that if you're doing a reading or you want to reflect on that archetype, you can just pop here and get a reminder. Now, there's a few things you can get a reminder on. So there's just the name. Then there's this little essential tagline that I've written that helps you understand this is a essential encapsulation of this summary. And this summary itself, if you click on here or here, it takes you through to the actual whole Magician post that I wrote. And if you look at the size of the scroll bar, you can tell how long this entire article is. And then this article again is broken up by a little menu on the left-hand side that lets you jump straight to each individual section, right? Now, that summary that you just saw was a summary of this entire post. Yeah, so let's go back to that and have a look. So I want to actually read from this. I might stop my share and I'll just read from this for you. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the role, the archetypal role of the Magician, and we're trying to deepen our understanding of that through exploring the 4 tools, and vice versa as well. We're going to explore the 4 tools and make more sense of them through this lens of the archetypal wielder of these 4 tools, which is the Magician. And if you're not following yet, the 4 tools are the 4 suits of the cards, which are swords, wands, pentacles, and cups. But let me read the essence of what I say the Magician's all about. The Magician. Mastery of duality, and the law of correspondence. Now, we need to appreciate that from a Hermetic context and also many other esoteric and wisdom traditions, including Taoism, everything that we encounter as part of our reality is subject to duality. In fact, the spiritual project of transcending that is called non-dualism. It's connecting with our relationship beyond dualism, in other words, with the unity that exists behind even duality, right? So when we talk about duality, what are we talking about? We're talking about various things. In principle, it's just the fact that there is a dual nature to everything that exists. If you take that one level down, not just abstract, but look at the kinds of dualities we explore. We're talking about masculine and feminine. We're talking about self and other. Self is this little microcosm of what we can think of as God, the ability to choose for ourselves, to create in some small way, to evolve through a journey. And our agency and our determination is different, is relative to, but different to that of others. So there's a duality, there's self and there's other. There's masculine and feminine. There's yin and yang. There's Shiva, the destructive principle, and there's Vishnu, the preserving principle. These dualities show up in electromagnetism, north and south poles, positive and negative terminals, the left and right-hand side of a mathematical equation, the black and white squares on a chessboard. All of these are examples, conceptual, literal, otherwise, of dualities. And we're saying that on an archetypal level, the magician is the embodies mastery of duality and the law of correspondence. Because not only is everything dual, but these dualities have correspondence. And therefore everything in the plenum, everything in the manifestation is both dual, and everything that is expressed through those forms of duality are also relative. There is a correspondence between them. As above, so below. This points to the inevitable geometry that exists in the world and the relationship between cause and effect, between above and below, between within and without, between the past and the future through the fulcrum of the now. Everything subscribes to this universality of principle, and the magician is the one that embodies the convergence of divine and worldly, wielding the power to align the universal and the mundane, standing at the intersection of will and reality. The magician exemplifies mastery over both inner and outer realms. What's the inner realm? Is this world we're talking about, our predictive model, our mind, our nous, our understanding internally, that is ours only. That we can share maps and common languages with other people, but our framing of that, our orientation to that is our own. And then also our psyche, our psychology, our narrative is how we orient ourselves to the story of life and orient that story to the greater cosmos. That is always our own orientation, relative to everything else, but very much our own and originating internally, not externally. So the magician exemplifies mastery over both inner and outer realms. The outer realm is the cosmos and the world that we share with everyone else. The magician commands the forces of creation through knowledge and intent. Each tool on the table, so we'll have a look at the little card and we'll see the 4 tools of the magician on the table in front of him. Every tool on the table symbolizes mastery over the elements that correspond to various aspects of existence, demonstrating that through the principle of as above, so below, one can transform thought into form and can transform potential into manifestation. And where the Hermetic implication here is that by embodying the law of correspondence, the magician is actually emulating that divine creative principle by which thought can be made into form and potential can be manifested. It's the same direction or causal principle at play in the whole, in the all, in the cosmos that the magician attempts to master and embody in themselves. That's the meaning of the archetype. The second little piece of the summary says, the magician's essence is one of deliberate action and conscious creation. So the magician is not just the one that can whimsically pull a rabbit out of a hat, metaphorically speaking. It's that there is a deliberation, a discernment, a precision to their actions and to their conscious creation, by which they bridge the divine and the material with precision of intention. Precision of intention, also in Hermetics called firmness of thought. And so this becomes an aspirational archetype for us to say when we're feeling out of control, or we're feeling overwhelmed by reality, or somehow at the mercy of our lives or of the mechanics of the world, what is then missing is this mastery. And then if we can embody or emulate or reproduce the symptoms of the magician, we can find a guiding narrative of symbols and meaning and logic and reason, but also of archetype and meaning by which to orient, so that we can become more like the magician, so that we can also embody this mastery over the reality that we're helping co-create, either consciously or unconsciously. The magician's essence reflects the inherent potential within each of us to engage with the world, not as passive observers, but as active participants in shaping reality. This is the mastery of self. This is the mastery of self and the natural laws, where understanding becomes the key to wielding power with grace and with efficacy, revealing the profound interconnectedness of all things through the will to become, the will to actualize, the will to pursue things and harness their teleology, their own purpose of fulfillment, of actualization, of realization, of becoming. Now, that little encapsulation that I just read is just a summary of a much longer article about the magician, a deep analysis that explores the etymology, the sacred geometry and the numbers represented in the card, the 4 tools separately, the alchemical relevance of the card and all the visual elements, the symbols in it, the Kabbalistic relevance, the Hermetic principles that are encoded, etc., etc., etc. It's many pages long, and sometimes too long to read, and it's for the very serious student, which is why I'm going to deliver courses on these and webinars on each of these, because even reading the text, it can be a little bit dry, and sometimes this form of transition is what's required. So, now we get an idea, basically, of what the magician is. And if we look at his card, I'll see if I can draw one up. I've shared my screen here. Always takes me, oh, son of a gun. There you go. I will share my screen very quickly. There we have it. Sometimes a bit too long. But there we see this fella, and we can see he's actually the visual depiction of this relationship between cause and effect. He literally is embodying a stance of as above, so below. In his one hand, he's holding a small wand or a candle. Also, it looks like the scroll of Torah, the law, the logos, yeah. And he's holding it in the one hand, almost like a rope that's pulling him up. But he's pointing the other hand down. He's literally showing as above, so below. But he's also being drawn up and connecting with that which is below, which means he's also a conduit between the two, yeah? And that is represented also by this little Ouroboros snake, the snake biting its own tail, which forms his belt. Now, a belt is an archetypal motif that is a ceremonial thing that is worn to represent marriage, to represent duty, to represent profession or association with a professional calling that one is bound to by oath, yeah, or by vow. So he has that around his waist. And there's a few other things that you can explore if you look at the card more deeply. But just to introduce this archetype, here he stands now. The red and white are very symbolic and meaningful, as are the lilies and the roses in front of him. His robes are red and white. And then the focal point of our chat today are those 4 tools sitting on the table in front of him. The one closest to him is a sword, you'll notice, but it's placed down. There's the next 2 are equidistant from him, which is the cup and the pentacle. The pentacle looks like a coin with a 5-pointed star in it. And the wand is lying on the table. Now you'll notice the only upright tool the only tool in its utilitarian orientation is the cup. And there's a reason for that. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into it today, but those are the 4 tools of the magician. Now, if I can zoom or scroll to one of these other places. So these are the 4 tools of the magician I showed you. And I think in the previous little segment I would have discussed that these things have universal context to them. We see them repeated in the playing cards. They are associated to each of the elements. We spoke about the treasure of the Duan, the Tuatha De Danann, the how they appear in the mythos of Jesus. And there's one more analysis that I want to share with you very quickly, but I'm not going to go too deeply into this because I don't want this to turn into a lesson or a webinar. I just want to introduce you into these things. So one of the analysis that I considered when I was thinking about the 4 tools of the magician is every time when you're dealing with things archetypally, you pay attention to numbers and cardinality of things, like 4 points of the cross, or 4 directions on the compass, the 4 winds, the 4 elements. Such things are not taken to relate arbitrarily. Right. The assumption when you're dealing with archetypes and Hermetic principles is that there's a universality to these things. Now, given the fact that the magician embodies the convergence of divine and worldly, wielding the power to align the universal and the mundane, there was something in here where I spoke about each tool on the table symbolizes mastery over elements that correspond to various aspects of existence, demonstrating that through the principle of as above, so below, one can transform thought into potential, and thought into form, and potential into manifestation. Now, aspects of electricity. I just want to Google this really quickly so I get this right. There is voltage, current, resistance, and load when you're talking about electricity. Voltage, current, resistance, and load or power, right? And to help us understand the magician, I actually just want to show you something that I was looking at earlier. Now let me share my screen again, which always takes longer than I want it to. But I'm looking here just at electricity. Now, assuming that there is some sense making to be made when we encounter things that occur naturally in 4s, like the 4 universal forces of gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, or fire, water, air, and earth. In this instance, I looked at electricity, this universal animating energy that we can relate to scientifically, right? So to help us bridge our understanding, we look at the logos, and then we look at the reflection of mythos, and we see what sense making it brings home inside of us. And when we look at electricity, we know that there is, you can ask a physicist or an electrician this, they'll tell you there is power is one of the considerations. In other words, the load that something has. There is the current, the flow of it, right? There's the voltage of it, and then there's the resistance that current experiences as it travels through the copper wire, let's say. And it's when we relate the 4 tools of the magician to these things. Now they've got volts, watts, amperage, and ohms of resistance. There's a unit of measure for each of these things. Now, I don't want to get too scientific. I just want to play with the idea here. We're not saying that there's a simple or obvious correlation between fire, water, air, and earth, but we are looking at what the archetypal function of the wand, the sword, the cup, and the pentacle are. And we're exploring how that might make sense. And this will give you some sort of understanding of where we're going with this. So one of the signatures of the pentacle, for example, is it looks like a coin. It's literally a gold coin. If you look at you might not be able to see this on the screen when I flash this up because it might be a bit small. Where are you, bastard? It looks like a coin, right? And so when it arrives in a reading as a modifier, we can recognize it by its archetypal meaning, which is that of currency, like a coin. And what is a coin but not stored value, but not stored potential? In other words, I can work, and in exchange for that work, I get given a coin, a tokenized version of my potential to spend it, my potential value to get things, to trade for things, right? That stored potential we call currency. And in electricity, that would be voltage, right? If we look at the cup is a vessel for giving and for receiving, archetypally speaking. Yeah, it can receive understanding, receive the upper light, but also like a heart, it can receive love and it can pour love out. And if we looked at the previous analysis, the cup used to be related, or the hearts in modern playing cards are derived from the cup. Yeah. And so now we can see that the heart has got a relationship with the cup and with the bowl and with the Holy Grail. Yeah. In our electricity analogy, or playing with that metaphor, current is the flow of energetic substance. And then we can say that energetic substance at a Hermetic archetypal sense is called giving and receiving. Giving and receiving. These are the two. This is a duality that exists fundamentally. So if you look at the concept of, if you look at the map of Kabbalah is another system which aligns or is congruent very strongly with Hermetics and Hermetic principles. And it's a system of mysticism and of codifying knowledge. And at the heart of that entire system is this premise that the all, or what they call God, is the bestower, the prime bestower, that which bestows everything, right? And we are each receivers. So there's the bestower and the receiver. And what we are is a vessel, an empty vessel that is a will to receive. And therein is created this animating battery, right, in which the current of all life flows between bestowal and receival. And the project of Kabbalah is to elevate your own consciousness and your own soul, your psyche, to such a degree that you can become equivalent in stages with the bestower through moderating your will to receive and slowly alchemizing that into a will to bestow. That's the project of Kabbalah. And through that, we can understand a little bit more about the relationship with, or the meaning of the cup. The cup as one of these tools of the magician. It means the magician then also is a master of that flow of giving and of receiving, right? And it's not just giving and receiving of stuff. This is archetypal in the same way that the Pentacle as a coin, as a currency, wasn't about an actual dollar or actual money. It's the archetypal sense of what that represents. Moving up from the bottom there, we've spoken about the Pentacle, we spoke about the cup, and now we're looking at the sword. Now, to understand the sword, there's a few invitations here. If you look at this little analysis, it's saying that in our electricity example, resistance is what is represented by the sword. Now, how might that be? And what has that got to do with structural limit? Let me pause again for a second. If there is now this current that is traveling through a medium, right, the nature of current and medium, like electricity traveling along a copper wire or a river traveling along a river course, one of the facts of that, one of the four facts of such exchange or movement is resistance. Right. So if you're transmitting sound through airwaves, the ambient air or atmosphere produces some resistance. If you introduce a sound into a medium like water, for example, the water will vibrate, and what you're looking at is an interaction between the energy that's inserted into it and the medium that's resisting that movement. And the continuous flow of energy goes into a medium and is broken invariably into packets. It's quantized, which means it's not, say, for example, if you had to blow a stream of air through a straw into a glass of water, it's not like that stream of air would go down the straw and then come up in a clear stream of air and reunite with the atmosphere. It breaks itself automatically into bubbles. It creates packets. It quantizes that flow, that intentional flow through the medium, right? In the same way, light, sound, everything that travels as a current or as a flow is quantized into packets, and we see that as waveforms, and we see that as light particles or photons. They're quantized particles of that flow. Some principle is slicing that into packets or into quanta or into cycles or hertz, right? And it's a relationship between the medium that a current is traveling through and the energy of that current and how those two interact, and the resistance and interference patterns that is caused by the two as they interact, that determines the shape, the frequency, and the amplitude of those little packets or bubbles, right? But some part of that physics is doing the slicing of that whole stream into bits. And that is the element or the aspect of reality and of physics and of everything else in the world that ends cycles. That there's this principle we can understand through looking at Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, some of the oldest beings were the fates, the moirai. They were said to be the ones that weave our fate, our thread. One of them weaves the thread. The other one sort of apportions it, yeah, and the other one cuts it. And the one that cuts it was called anthropos. It lends itself to the word atrophy, when things decline or decay or run out of use. Yeah, this is the word. Some principle in reality achieves that. And now when we switch to another concept called justice, let me just show you here quickly. This is the justice card. You'll see this cat is sitting there with scales on the one side. That's the measurement. And the execution, the cutting, is done by the sword in the other hand. And what that means is not justice the way human beings think about justice in a court of law, right? Or justice when a bad thing happened and I got it fixed. Justice is, from an archetypal perspective, is the execution of divine law at every single scale. In other words, the fact that the sun sets at the end of an evening, the fact that the tide rises and then ebbs and then flows, the fact that all the principles of physics and all the mechanics of the universe work just so and keep working just so and interact just so and hold together at these perfect limits of atomic valencies and strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces and everything that works according to such indelible principle. We can say that that principle is called logos. It's the law, it's the word by which the universe was created. And the thing that executes that is what's built into physics and into all other kinds of mechanics, even non-physical mechanics, that ensure that such things occur. So in Vedic mythology or philosophy, we think of Vishnu and Shiva, the preserving principle and the destructive principle. And there, the destructive principle is not perceived to be wicked or evil or bad. It's just a reality of ongoing creation, right? The sword is part of that. The cutting, the limiting, the execution of such justice. Yeah. And so one of the functions of the tools of the magician is one explanation is how the magician takes that sword and severs the illusion or executes justice, right? So when you see swords represented on seals or in statues, it always represents some such thing. And in fact, one of the representations of logos, in other words, the spoken law of the divine, the word of God that was uttered into the void, by which everything was created, the ordering principle of everything is of a word, a spoken word, right? That's actually what logos means in ancient Greek. And logos also is taken to mean this idea of Hermetic law by which everything works. And it's represented by a sword. And you can see the Ace of Swords. Gosh, this bloody camera drives me nuts sometimes. You can see it's presented such, with a crown on top. And that brings us to the last tool of the magician, which is the wand. Now, this is the easiest one to understand in relationship to a magician, because in our mythos, Merlin, Gandalf, they all use wizards' staffs, right? And we can relate to the fact that that magic wielder uses the staff to direct their magic, to represent their source of power and their connection with that power, but also their wielding of it. Now, it shows up in lots of archetypal examples. One of them is the wizard's wand, like in Harry Potter, where they direct their magic via a wand. To direct something is also what a conductor does in directing or conducting a piece of a symphony orchestra. And that little wand is called a baton. A baton is also used by a bard, a storyteller that weaves myth and has the kind of magic to influence people's hearts and minds and how they remember things. Yeah, he can actually be instrumental in that magic of creating the reality that they hold in their memory and in their minds, how they store their version of reality, what they believe to be true. A bard is the kind of character or the storyteller that can make that happen. And the one that he uses is called a baton. Every time you see a king or an emperor in Greece, in Roman mythos, in Indian mythos, in universal mythos, the king holds a kind of, even in Egyptian mythos, the king holds a kind of scepter, a rod of power. Bishops and the Pope have a kind of modified shepherd's crook called a crozier. The shepherd guided the sheep through his shepherd's crook. This image of the wand shows up again and again and again in many different ways. And this is one of the four tools of the magician. And it's through this, through the pentacles, the currency, both knowledge of one's own quintessence and currency and stored value, the ability to store value, the cup, which is this flow of energetic substance, of giving and receiving, and of other forces, because giving and receiving of what? Of instruction, of intentionality, of understanding, of goodwill, of love, of will. Then the sword, which is how we sever illusions, how we execute our control or mastery over justice. And then the wand, which is how we direct and how we wield power. Now we start understanding the relationship between the tools, 4 tools of the magician, and the magician's role, and then vice versa as well. The tools help us understand the magician archetype, and the magician archetype helps us understand the 4 tools. Now, this was meant to be an introduction. And again, just to bring your attention to where this is relevant, obviously, if you take archetypes seriously, knowledge of these things becomes fundamental. People try and understand Kabbalah or alchemy or Gnosticism or Hermetics. And the question is always, what's the cash value under that? Understand it for what? So that I know these ancient mystic scrolls or formulas or rules, or so what? What's the so that behind all of that? And that has to be to live a more skillful life, right? Towards what the ancient Greeks called entelecheia, which is this pursuit of actualization, of becoming, right? Of fulfillment of purpose, discovery and fulfillment of purpose. And the other side of that was eudaimonia, this art of living well, of flourishing, of prosperity, of living in harmony with all and being of service to community and to other people and to the relationships we care about. And we don't, of course, just actualize arbitrarily. We actualize in alignment with our own dharma, with our own sense of calling, and we actualize through our projects of self-determination and self-actualization, through our relationships, mutual actualization, and actualization through our crafts and our callings, which is our work and our professions and our occupations in this world. And if that's the intentionality, we can now suddenly understand why we might want to become as a magician, why we would want to do this with more mastery, with more composure, with more intentionality, with more discernment, with more precision, with more, and there's the collective word is mastery. And remember, the magician is the one who represents mastery of that principle of as above, so below, of correspondence, by mastering the 4 tools. And through that, now we consider all those 4 sort of sub-projects, the wielding of power and the direction of our intentionality, the execution of our will through the sword, the temperance, the titration, the moderation of giving and receiving, of flow, which is like regulation of energy. Energy regulation is a key thing. And then our sense of currency and quintessence, which is the Pentacle. Now, this is just an introduction. I hope this has piqued your interest. I hope this has given you pause for thought. And I also hope this has helped you understand this, both the archetype of the magician and these 4 archetypal tools in a much deeper and more relatable sense. And again, if you stick around after this, I'm just about to show you that video of how the readings work. I think it's about another 15 minutes tacked on to the end of this. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So how's that for episode 3? And I hope to see you back here next time. And by all means, if I don't mention this again in the next segment, book some time with me and come and do a reading and figure out how to apply all of this depth of sensibility into your projects of actualization and becoming. Yeah, that's it. Until next time.